Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. Clara Hensley never imagined that the choices her parents made years ago would one day decide the course of her own life. She was 25, quiet, observant, and deeply intuitive. She wasn't naive, though people often mistook her gentle nature for fragility. Clara believed in love, but not the kind splashed across movie screens. For her, love was quieter. It grew in glances, in acts of care, in silent moments where souls spoke louder than words. But fate, it seemed, had a much louder story in mind for her. She had always lived modestly, a small house on the edge of town, wildflowers in the backyard, books stacked like bricks in every corner. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. That is, until the letter arrived, a thick envelope sealed with a crest she didn't recognize. The Blackwood crest. That night, her mother's hands trembled as she held the papers. Her voice cracked like dry leaves as she explained, "We signed it when you were still in school. We never imagined they'd enforce it." Clara stared at the signature. Her father's, written in desperate ink years ago. Her family had fallen into financial ruin. Her father had borrowed money from the Blackwoods, powerful magnates whose name carried the weight of empires. The debt was never repaid. The Blackwoods didn't forget, and Ethan Blackwood, the heir, the legend, the man whispered about in fear and awe, was coming to collect what was promised. Clara. At first, she thought it was some mistake, a sick legal joke. But the knock came, sharp and inevitable, like a sentence read aloud in court. Ethan stood there in a black coat, framed by the doorway like a shadow given form. His eyes were sharp, cool, unreadable. He didn't speak like a villain. He spoke like a man who knew he was right. "You were promised to me," he said plainly, "and I always collect what is mine." Clara felt her stomach twist. "I'm not an object," she said. He didn't blink. "No, but you're part of a deal. And in my world, deals are sacred." Her mother wept quietly in the next room. Clara's chest burned with a rage she didn't fully understand. She could have run, screamed, begged, but something stopped her. Not submission, not fear. Something colder. Something that said, "If I have to live this, I will not live it broken." The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and old paper. No music, no flowers, no warmth. Clara wore a pale blue dress, chosen not for beauty, but because it was the only one that still fit. Ethan signed the marriage certificate without looking at her. He didn't say, "I do." He simply wrote his name with the indifference of a man approving a contract. When the clerk offered the customary line, "You may kiss the bride," Ethan stepped away. Not even a glance. Not even a pretense. Outside, a black car waited. Clara climbed in without a word. The ride was long. City streets turned into empty highways, highways into winding mountain roads. The silence between them thickened with each passing mile. She stared out the window, memorizing the trees, the fading light, the curves of the land, because she knew, in some way, her old life was vanishing with each bend. Blackwood Manor appeared like something out of a dream, grand, towering, silent. It didn't feel lived in. It felt guarded. As the car stopped, the iron gates closed behind them with a sound that chilled her spine. Inside, chandeliers hung like frozen constellations, and the walls were so white they seemed to reject warmth. There was no scent of food, no footsteps, no echo of laughter, only the hum of money and silence. "You'll have your own room," Ethan said without turning to her. "We don't need to pretend this is something it's not." Clara didn't respond. She followed him down the marble hallway, her heels clicking like a metronome in an empty ballroom. He opened a door and gestured inside, then left. She stepped in and froze. The room was large, pristine, and untouched, except for one thing laid gently on the bed atop folded linen sheets. A white silk nightgown, her nightgown, the one her mother had packed, whispering that it might give her comfort. Someone had opened her luggage. Someone had laid it out for her, deliberate, calculated. She sat on the edge of the bed, the silence pressing against her like a wall. Every muscle in her body was tense. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. Hours passed. The sky outside grew dark, and moonlight spilled across the room like silver water. She didn't change clothes, didn't undress. She sat by the window, arms wrapped around her knees, waiting for what, she didn't know, until the knock came. It wasn't soft. Ethan entered before she could answer. His jacket gone, shirt slightly unbuttoned, his hair tousled like the day had gotten to him. His eyes didn't wander. They went straight to her. "You know why you're here?" he said. Clara stood, not shrinking. "Do you?" That stopped him. His jaw tightened. "This isn't about feelings. This is obligation. You're here because your family couldn't pay." She tilted her head. "So I'm your punishment for a dead man's mistake?" His silence was sharper than any insult. Clara took a step closer, then paused. "If you're trying to make me feel small, it won't work. I didn't agree to this, but I'm here. And I won't be quiet about it." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to lecture me about pain. You don't know anything about what your family took from mine." Something flickered behind his voice, grief, resentment. It wasn't clear, but it wasn't hatred, not fully. Clara's voice softened, but her spine stayed straight. "Then say what you really want to say. Don't use me to fight your ghosts." A long silence stretched between them. Then, without a word, Ethan turned and walked out, the door closing softly behind him, but not gently. Clara exhaled slowly. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, from the fire she felt rising inside. She didn't know what kind of war she had just walked into. But one thing was clear. She wouldn't lose herself in it. The next morning arrived, not with sunlight, but with gray skies that matched the weight in Clara's chest. She had barely slept. The silence of Blackwood Manor was deafening. Too clean, too untouched, like a hotel no one had ever lived in. Even the ticking of the antique clock in the hall sounded rehearsed, like it belonged to a life she had not chosen. A maid she hadn't met yet knocked on her door around 8, announcing with a practiced voice that her presence was required in the drawing room. Clara dressed slowly, choosing a simple beige blouse and navy skirt, not to impress, but to armor herself in neutrality. She wanted no misinterpretations, no invitations, just space. When she stepped into the drawing room, Ethan was already seated. The space was vast, with ceilings so high her voice might echo if she dared to speak. Sunlight strained through tall windows but didn't touch him. He sat with perfect posture behind a polished mahogany table, reading over documents that didn't care it was his wedding day. "Sit," he said without looking up. Clara Saturday, her chair creaked, a human sound in a house full of ghostly quiet. "The civil ceremony is scheduled for noon," he continued, flipping to another page. "It'll be handled quickly. You'll sign, I'll sign, and it will be done." She didn't respond. He finally looked up. "I assume you understand this isn't traditional." Clara met his gaze. Nothing about this island. Something in the corner of his jaw twitched, but he said nothing. The papers were signed without witnesses, without joy. When they arrived at the government office, the official recognized Ethan immediately and stood straighter, his tone switching to one of forced cheerfulness. "A pleasure, Mr. Blackwood. Shall we begin?" Clara stood beside him, hands clasped in front of her. No ring, no bouquet. Her mother had offered a faded white scarf to wrap around her shoulders for memory's sake, but Clara had left it in the car. She didn't want a memory, she wanted escape. The vows were omitted, Ethan had requested it. The official read the legal jargon. Clara signed her name with a hand that didn't shake. Ethan signed his like he was authorizing a wire transfer. "You may kiss the bride," the official offered, smiling. Ethan didn't even blink. He stepped away, murmuring something about the car waiting outside. Clara felt the moment crumble, not out of heartbreak, but out of clarity. This wasn't marriage, it was erasure. The ride back to the manor was shorter, somehow, though the road was the same, perhaps because Clara had stopped looking out the window. There was nothing to see anymore, only walls. When they arrived, she hesitated at the steps of the mansion. Ethan turned. "Do you need help walking through the door?" The sarcasm cut sharper than it should have. "I'm wondering what kind of prison lets its inmates walk in freely," she said, stepping past him. He didn't follow immediately. Inside, the air was cool and scented with lavender, an intentional luxury, perhaps to mask the truth. A butler she hadn't met bowed stiffly and gestured toward the west wing. "Your room is prepared, Mrs. Blackwood." She flinched. That name didn't belong to her. It felt like a costume she'd been forced to wear. When she reached her room, the door already open, she paused again. The space was beautiful, in a clinical sort of way. Large windows, silk curtains, carved furniture that looked too expensive to touch. A vanity stood near the corner, and beside it, a wardrobe already filled with clothes in neutral shades. Everything fit her, which terrified her. He had planned all of it. Later that afternoon, a knock came again. Ethan stood outside, his sleeves rolled up, a pen in hand. "There are a few more documents," he said. "Prenuptial clauses, property designations. Sign them and keep a copy." Clara took the papers, glancing briefly at the lines that spoke of assets, trusts, estates, as if love could be itemized. "I suppose this is the part where you tell me my duties," she said, sarcasm barely masked. He raised an eyebrow. "There are no duties, not in the traditional sense." "Then what is this, Ethan?" His name on her tongue startled them both. He took a moment before answering. "This is control. You lost your choices a long time ago. I'm just here to make sure no one forgets it." He turned and left. Clara stared at the space he had just occupied, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her. That evening, dinner was served in separate rooms. She ate alone in silence, poking at grilled vegetables and lamb on a porcelain plate, her appetite gone. She imagined him doing the same in a room across the mansion, two strangers sharing a contract, not a connection. But what gnawed at her wasn't just the loneliness, it was the emptiness, the complete lack of curiosity from him, as if she was a task completed, a checkbox ticked, and yet something told her this wasn't the end of it. His coldness wasn't indifference, it was protection, a wall, not a void. That night, as she lay in the bed she didn't want, beneath covers that smelled faintly of cedar and unfamiliarity, Clara whispered into the dark, "This isn't love. But I refuse to let it be my death." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, low and distant, and somewhere in the house, Ethan paced, not because of guilt, but because, for the first time in years, something about a woman wouldn't leave his mind. And that scared him more than anything. The mansion felt colder that night, not because of the weather, though the wind whispered against the tall windows, but because something in the air had shifted, the kind of stillness that doesn't calm you but warns you. Clara stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, fingers nervously tracing the hem of the silk nightgown her mother had packed. It clung to her skin with a softness that almost mocked her reality. She had never worn it before. She had imagined saving it for someone who loved her, someone who would touch her not out of right but out of reverence. But tonight wasn't about love. Tonight wasn't about anything sacred. Her reflection looked back at her. Bare arms, bare legs, bare soul. She wasn't afraid of being touched. She was afraid of being erased. A knock echoed. 2 sharp taps. Not hesitant, not kind. Clara turned toward the door. Her voice caught in her throat. Before she could speak, it opened. Ethan stepped inside. He wasn't in a suit this time, a white button-up, black slacks, sleeves rolled, no tie. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hand through it for hours. His eyes scanned her slowly shoulders, arms, fabric, silence. He said nothing. Clara crossed her arms instinctively, trying to hide the vulnerability she'd been forced to wear. "I didn't invite you," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "This isn't about invitations," he replied. The door clicked shut behind him. He walked further into the room but stopped several feet away, as though something invisible held him back. His posture was tense, not from desire but from something more dangerous. Restraint mixed with resentment. "I assume you wore that to play a part," he said, nodding toward her nightgown, "to make it easier for both of us." Clara straightened. "My mother gave this to me. It's the only piece of comfort I have here, and if you think it's some kind of performance, you're more lost than I thought." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly masked. "I don't want comfort," he muttered. "I want closure." Clara tilted her head. "Closure for what? For someone else's mistakes?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He stepped closer now, and she felt the weight of his presence settle over her. He stopped only a few inches away, close enough that she could smell the faint trace of his cologne. Woodsy, dark, expensive, cold. "You're not here to argue," he said. "You're here to obey." Clara didn't flinch. "Then you've already lost." "Because I don't obey anyone who can't look me in the eye." He did, right then. His eyes, stormy and distant, met hers with a fire he didn't mean to reveal. For a moment, the mansion seemed to go silent around them, no ticking clocks, no wind, just 2 strangers chained together by paper and pain. Ethan reached out, slowly, deliberately, and touched the strap of her gown. His fingers brushed against her skin. She didn't move. "You don't belong in my world," he said softly, almost to himself. "Then stop forcing me into it," she replied. His hand dropped. The tension broke. He turned, walking toward the window, his back to her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I didn't want this," he confessed. "Not like this." Clara walked toward him, not to bridge the distance but to confront it. "Then why go through with it? Why trap someone who never wronged you?" Silence. Then, quietly, he answered, "Because someone had to pay, and your last name was the price." Her breath caught. There it was, the truth laid bare, ugly and cold. She wasn't a wife. She was a punishment. Ethan turned back around, his eyes sharper now. "Don't mistake my silence for kindness, Clara. I didn't save you, I claimed you." Clara stepped back, fire rising in her throat. "You think you scare me, Ethan? You think because you wear tailored suits and own empires you can control me? You can't even control your own grief." That struck deeper than she intended. Ethan moved toward her quickly, not violently, but with purpose. For a second, she thought he might raise his voice. Instead, he whispered, "You know nothing about grief. I know enough to recognize it when I see a man drowning in it," she replied. The moment stretched. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as a transaction but as a mirror, and it terrified him. He turned to leave but paused before reaching the door. His voice was quieter now, almost human. "Don't wear that again. It doesn't suit this place." Clara didn't respond. She watched him walk out, the door shutting behind him with a weight that shook her bones. She stood there, the white silk brushing her knees, her chest rising and falling with something between rage and sorrow. She had been humiliated, but not broken. She walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and stared out into the night. Somewhere in the distance, lightning lit up the sky like a warning. The storm wasn't outside. It was here, inside these walls, inside both of them, and it was only beginning. The next morning arrived, not with peace, but with defiance quietly brewing beneath Clara's calm exterior. She had not slept much. Her body lay still, but her mind had been in constant motion, running through the words, the stares, the weight of Ethan's touch and retreat. He had spoken as if she were an object used, signed for, collected, but beneath that cruelty, she had seen it, the tremble behind the mask. And she had no intention of playing along. The moment her bare feet touched the cold floor that morning, something in her shifted. It wasn't anger, not the kind that burned outward, but something steadier, quieter. She wouldn't scream, she wouldn't cry, but she also wouldn't kneel. She dressed herself with intention, a soft white blouse, buttoned all the way up, and dark trousers, structured, sharp, no lace, no silk, no symbols of softness. When she stepped out of her room, the hallway was empty, but she didn't move slowly. She walked like she belonged there, like she wasn't a prisoner in a golden cage. Downstairs, the house staff scattered at the sight of her, not out of disrespect, but confusion. No one had given them instructions about the wife. No one had told them if she was to be served, ignored, obeyed, or feared. So they watched her from corners and doorways, unsure. Clara walked into the dining room as though it had always been hers. The long table stretched beneath a crystal chandelier, set for one, not two. Ethan's absence was loud. A silver tray rested at the head of the table, covered. She, Saturday. The butler approached, hesitating only slightly before lifting the lid to reveal her breakfast. An omelet, fruit, and a steaming cup of black coffee. She began to eat with grace, with silence, and with power. Halfway through her meal, she heard footsteps, calm, precise, familiar. Ethan entered the room in a tailored gray suit, his hair still damp from the shower. He didn't look surprised to see her there, but he didn't look pleased either. "I assumed you'd eat in your room," he said, pouring himself a glass of water. "I assumed you'd have the courtesy to leave space at the table for your wife," she replied without looking up. He paused, amused. "Is that what you think this is? A marriage?" "I think," she said, finally raising her eyes to meet his. "Whatever this is, I refuse to disappear inside of it." Their gazes locked, neither blinking. He took a seat a few chairs away, not beside her, not across, diagonally, just far enough to pretend the tension between them didn't exist. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. She sipped her coffee. "You expected a doll. You got a woman." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Careful, Clara. That kind of fire has consequences." She placed her cup down, her expression calm. "So does cruelty." The words hovered between them, not shouted, not weaponized, just true. Ethan didn't respond right away. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the table. Once. Twice. "Stop. Most women would try to earn my affection," he murmured. "Then perhaps you've only met women who didn't know their worth." He stiffened but said nothing. Clara stood, gathering her things. "I'll be in the library," she said, not waiting for permission. The library became her sanctuary, a cathedral of books, leather-bound and smelling of dust and age. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting golden light over the floor. She found a worn armchair in the corner and sat with a copy of Wuthering Heights, the irony not lost on her. She read, not to escape, but to reclaim her mind, her thoughts, her voice. The hours passed, no one came, but someone was watching. That evening, when she returned to her room, a dress lay on her bed. Deep navy silk, elegant and understated. No note, no explanation. Clara looked at it for a long time, then carefully folded it and placed it inside the wardrobe. She chose her own clothes again. At dinner, she sat alone once more, but this time she didn't feel invisible. Ethan arrived later, again in silence, again keeping his distance, but his eyes watched her every movement. "I heard you've claimed the library," he said dryly. "I didn't know knowledge had to be claimed," she replied, slicing her roasted vegetables with grace. "You don't have to make this difficult. I'm not the one who made it anything at all." Another pause, another silence. "You're different than Sophia," he said suddenly. Clara's knife paused mid-cut. "Sophia?" He regretted saying the name the moment it left his lips. His eyes darkened. "No one," he muttered. Clara didn't push. She didn't need to. The truth would find its way to her. She was sure of that now, but what struck her wasn't his evasion. It was the way he'd said her name, with pain, not love. So this was never about desire. It was about ghosts. That night, Clara opened a journal blank, leather-bound, untouched, a gift she had brought with her from her old home. She began to write, not about him, not about the mansion, about herself, about who she had been before the contract and who she refused to stop being now. Words poured onto the page like fire-made ink. When she finally stopped, the house was asleep, except one room across the hall where Ethan sat in his study, whiskey in hand, staring at a photo frame he kept hidden in a drawer, a woman with dark hair, a smile, Sophia, his past, his war, and Clara, his battlefield. But she didn't know yet just how deeply her rebellion was shifting something inside him, nor how dangerous the line between hate and need would become. 3 days passed, 3 days of silence broken only by the occasional clink of silverware or the rustle of Clara's skirt as she moved through the house like a ghost in rebellion. Ethan remained distant, as if ignoring her presence might erase the reality of their arrangement. But Clara had grown stronger in the quiet, strong enough to admit what had been circling in her thoughts since the first night. She had to leave, not someday, now. The plan took shape quietly, like the forming of a storm beneath a still sky. Clara noted the guards. 2, both stationed at the front gate, one older and distracted, the other younger and more observant. The kitchen staff left the back patio doors unlocked when they took smoke breaks. The security cameras didn't reach the back gardens, and the only phone accessible was in the library. Ethan had made sure of that. But she also learned something else. He trusted her passivity, mistook her stillness for submission. It would be his mistake. That evening, she wore a soft, loose sweater and jeans, easy to move in, quiet. She didn't eat dinner, claiming a headache. The butler accepted the excuse without hesitation. She returned to her room, closed the door, waited, and then, at 2:13 a.m., she slipped out. The hallway was bathed in shadows. Her bare feet made no sound against the marble floor. She avoided the main staircase and took the service stairs near the west wing, ones she'd discovered 2 days earlier behind a linen closet. Every step felt like a countdown. In the kitchen, she paused. One camera, high-angled toward the hallway but blind to the patio door. She slipped out onto the stone path. The air was cold, her breath fogged in front of her. She didn't look back. The garden stretched out before her. Wild, beautiful, useless. She moved quickly but carefully, crouching low when needed, using hedges as cover. The estate fence was tall, wrapped in climbing ivy. At the very back, a rusted maintenance gate sat forgotten. She had spotted it from the library window days ago. When she reached it, her fingers trembled as she tested the latch. Unlocked God. It was unlocked. She pushed it open. Slow, deliberate. It creaked, but the wind masked the sound. Beyond the ivy fence, the world waited. A narrow road, trees, the illusion of freedom. And then a voice, low, sharp, right behind her. Going somewhere? Clara froze, her heart crashing against her ribs like thunder. She turned slowly. Ethan stood there, no coat, no shoes, just a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, and eyes that burned like stormlight. "I told you," he said, stepping forward. "This isn't a game." Clara's hands clenched into fists. "Neither is my life." He didn't smile, didn't yell. He just took another step until they stood face to face in the dark. "You really thought I wouldn't notice?" he asked, almost softly. "That I wouldn't feel it the moment you disappeared from the house?" She swallowed hard. "If you had any decency, you'd let me go." Ethan's voice dropped. "And if you had any idea what happens to people who leave this house unprotected, you wouldn't be so quick to run into the night." Clara's eyes narrowed. "So this is protection now? Locking me in a mansion like a prisoner?" "No," he snapped. "This is control, and you don't get to have it." She took a step back, but he caught her wrist, firm, not cruel. Her breath hitched. "You don't own me," she whispered. "No," he replied. "But I own the consequences." His grip loosened. He wasn't angry. He was something worse, wounded. He turned his back on her, walking a few steps into the open space, exhaling into the cold air. "Do you know what happens to people who carry my name?" he asked. "They become targets, pawns, leverage. You think you're safer out there than in here?" Clara didn't respond. He turned back to her. "I should have let you run. It would have been easier, cleaner. Then why didn't you?" His voice cracked, just slightly. "Because I can't, and I don't know why." She stared at him. In that moment, he didn't look powerful. He looked lost. But her resolve didn't fade. "You don't get to trap me here because you're broken," she said. "You don't get to punish me because you can't mourn her." Ethan flinched. "You don't know anything about Sophia," he said. "No," she replied, her voice soft now, "but I know grief when I see it, trying to wear control's armor." The silence between them deepened. The wind picked up. The gate creaked again behind her. Still open, still possible. But when she looked at it now, she wasn't sure if it represented freedom or retreat. Ethan extended his hand, not forcefully, not as a command. "Come back inside." Clara didn't move. "Why?" she asked. His answer came low, like a confession dragged from someplace he didn't want to reveal. "Because I don't trust anyone else to keep you safe." She stared at his hand, at the night, at the road, then back at the man who had chained her to his pain, and now stood trembling beneath the weight of his own walls. Slowly, she stepped forward, not because she surrendered, but because she realized something important. If she was going to fight, she would fight him from the inside. Days passed, but the silence between Clara and Ethan didn't ease. It thickened, grew roots in every hallway, seeped into the walls, curled around every word left unspoken. They shared the same house, the same name, the same history forged by paper and pain, but they lived in different worlds. Clara's rebellion had not gone unnoticed. Since the night of her attempted escape, Ethan kept his distance. He did not try to reason with her, but his eyes, they followed her every step she took, every room she entered. And Clara felt it. His control was cracking. It came to a head on the night of the corporate dinner. Clara had overheard the staff whispering about it that morning. A gathering of Ethan's most powerful partners, men who wrote checks with countries on the pay line, women who ruled boardrooms and brought entire corporations to their knees. It was to be held at the estate. She wasn't invited, but she wasn't going to stay hidden either. She found the box in her wardrobe, not tucked away, not buried, but displayed. Her dress, new, blood red, sleek, off the shoulder, designed to accentuate and provoke. There was no note, but the message was clear. "Wear this if you dare." Clara did, not to please him, but to confront him. She stepped into the fabric like it was armor, painting her lips a deep crimson to match. Her hair fell in soft waves, her heels clicked sharply against the marble, as she descended the stairs with the grace of a queen returning to a kingdom she had never asked to rule. When she entered the grand ballroom, conversation paused. All eyes turned. Ethan was standing near the fireplace, glass in hand, locked in conversation with a man who wore power like perfume. But the moment he saw her, the world dropped away. His jaw clenched, his grip on the glass tightened, something in his chest shifted, and it wasn't desire, it was rage. Clara didn't flinch. She walked straight into the room, each step deliberate, heads turned, whispers ignited like sparks in dry grass. She could feel them, the judgments, the curiosity. Who was this woman standing beside Ethan Blackwood, like she belonged there? She smiled politely and said nothing. Ethan didn't move at first. He let the air burn between them, then he crossed the room, fast, too fast. His hand caught her elbow, gently but firmly. "We need to talk," he muttered. "In front of your guests?" she replied sweetly. "That might make for a memorable evening." He didn't answer. He led her, almost dragged her, through a side door and down a narrow hallway. When they reached the sitting room, he closed the door with a sharp click. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed. She looked him straight in the eye. "Existing. You wore that to humiliate me. I wore this because I wanted to feel like myself for one night, not your prisoner, not your debt, a woman." His jaw tightened. "You're playing with fire. Then let it burn." The tension snapped. He stepped closer, his voice dropped. "You don't get to come in here like some queen and what?" she challenged. "Make you feel something?" That stopped him. His hands dropped to his sides. His eyes searched hers, not with anger, but with something raw, something undone. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said quietly. "I think I do," she replied. "I'm showing you who I am, and you hate that you can't control it." His silence said everything. Clara stepped past him toward the window. "I saw the way they looked at me," she continued, "like I was nothing, like I didn't belong in your world. They don't matter." "Yes, they do, because they're reflections of you." He exhaled hard. "You think I want to be this man?" She turned slowly, then stopped. Another silence stretched. Finally, he crossed the room again, slower this time. His fingers grazed her arm, hesitant, conflicted. "You were supposed to be a transaction," he admitted, "a name on paper, a consequence." Clara held his gaze. "But I'm not." "No," he whispered. "You're not." And then, without warning, his hand curled into the fabric at her waist, not to pull her closer, not yet, but as if grounding himself. Clara didn't move. His other hand lifted, almost shaking, tracing the curve of her shoulder where the dress exposed her skin. "You drive me insane," he murmured. "This house was peaceful before you. It was dead before me," she replied, his head bowed, breath shallow. "I can't look at you and not see her." "Then look harder," Clara said, "because I'm not a ghost, and I'm not your past." Ethan stepped back, suddenly ashamed. "I shouldn't have let you come down here like this." "I should have." "What? Kept me hidden?" "You already tried that." "And I still found my way into the light." He stared at her. Red dress, defiant eyes, a soul that refused to shrink. Then, in a flash of frustration, he turned and struck the edge of the fireplace mantel with his fist. "Damn it, Clara," he breathed. She didn't flinch. "Whatever it is you're running from," she said softly, "you won't outrun it by chaining me to it." He turned back to her, pain carved into every line of his face. For the first time, the mask cracked, and behind it, she saw not a villain, but a man drowning in memories he couldn't bury. She stepped toward him, close enough to feel the heat of his skin, but she didn't touch him, not yet. Instead, she whispered, "You can hate me if you want, but I won't disappear." And with that, she turned and walked out. The hallway was still humming with distant music. The guests were laughing, drinking, unaware that in a room behind closed doors, something had just shattered. Not glass, not anger, but control. Ethan didn't follow. He stood there, staring at the place where she had just stood. And for the first time in years, he didn't know what to do. The days after the dinner unfolded like a storm refusing to end. No thunder, no lightning, just the heavy tension of a sky that wouldn't clear. Ethan didn't speak to her, is greater than. He vanished into meetings, phone calls, late-night drives with tinted windows. But Clara felt the shift. Something had broken, and she intended to find out what. She began with the obvious, the staff. They had grown accustomed to her presence now, still polite, still formal, but no longer avoiding her gaze. One of the younger maids, Lila, had let something slip during breakfast. "Mr. Blackwood hasn't gone to the cemetery in over a year," she'd said, unprompted, while pouring tea. "Used to go every month like clockwork, but he stopped after she came." Clara didn't ask who she was. She didn't need to. Later that day, she went to the library and found the door to Ethan's private study left slightly ajar, a rare oversight. Her pulse quickened. She stood in the doorway for a moment, waiting for guilt to pull her back. It didn't. She stepped inside. The study was darker than the rest of the house. Heavy curtains, old books, a fireplace unused but still scented with smoke. Papers were stacked in precise piles on the desk, and behind it, shelves lined with photos, most of them business-related. Events, launches, success. But one frame was different, tucked into a corner of the bookshelf, partially hidden behind an award. Clara pulled it out, a photograph of a woman, dark hair, soft eyes, laughing, head thrown back mid-motion, completely unaware of the camera. There was no frame like it anywhere else in the house. Sophia, the name hung in Clara's mind like a puzzle piece that had been waiting to fall into place. Who was she? She searched the drawers, not to invade, but to understand. The second drawer on the left was locked, but the third was not. Inside, she found a worn notebook. The pages were filled with notes, meetings, numbers, and a single photograph slipped between the pages. It showed Ethan and the woman again, Sophia. They stood beside a car, arms around each other, the kind of closeness that couldn't be faked. She looked nothing like Clara, but the emotion in Ethan's face, that raw, unfiltered affection, cut deeper than any resemblance. Clara closed the notebook slowly, her heart tight. This wasn't about control, it was about grief. And Clara wasn't the cause, she was the placeholder for a wound that had never healed. That night, over dinner, she didn't confront him directly. She waited, observed. Ethan's silence wasn't cold anymore. It was guarded, measured. "I found her picture," Clara said softly. He froze, fork halfway to his mouth, jaw tensed, eyes locked on hers. "I wasn't snooping," she added. "I just wanted to understand." He set the fork down. "She died in a car accident," he said, 3 years ago. Clara nodded. "I'm sorry." He laughed bitterly. "You shouldn't be. It was your father's fault." The words landed like glass shattering. Clara blinked. "What?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, fingers interlocked, his voice tight with a rage he had mastered over time. "Your father was driving the truck. He was supposed to have the brakes replaced the week before. He didn't cost-saving measure, I assume. It failed on the curve. Sophia was in the passenger seat of the car he hit. Clarice's blood ran cold. My father never told me that. Of course he didn't." He settled quietly. The Blackwoods were compensated publicly. It was labeled an accident. Ethan's voice dropped. "But I knew. I saw the report. I read every word." Clara sat still, frozen, shamed by something she never touched, never chose, never even knew. "So that's why you brought me here," she whispered, "to punish me." Ethan looked away. "I didn't plan it like that," he muttered. "But when the debt came due and your mother reminded me of the agreement, I said, yes, not for business, not for redemption, but because I wanted someone to pay." Clara felt her chest tighten. "I'm not him." "I know," he said. The words were quiet, broken. "I knew the moment you looked me in the eye and didn't flinch." Tears threatened the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. "You made me carry the weight of something I never did." He didn't deny it. "I needed someone to blame. And you were there." Clara stood. She walked around the table slowly and sat in the chair beside him, not across, not at a distance. "If you're still looking for someone to blame," she said, "it won't heal you." He stared at her, and for a moment, she saw the boy he must have been, grieving, alone, furious at a world that didn't make sense. "I don't know how to let it go," he admitted. She reached for his hand, not to comfort him, but to ground herself in the moment. "Then don't," she said. "But stop using me to keep it alive." Silence fell again, but it was different now, not hostile, heavy, honest. He nodded once, a small gesture. But it was the first crack in the wall he had built between them. That night, she couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but because the truth had changed everything. She understood now, But understanding didn't mean forgiving. Not yet. And as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she realized this wasn't the end of their war. It was the beginning of something more dangerous. Hope. The air inside Blackwood Manor shifted again, subtly but undeniably. Clara felt it in the way the staff looked at her, less like a stranger, more like someone becoming real. She felt it in the way Ethan passed her in the hall, still silent, still distant, but now his eyes lingered just a second longer. Something unspoken had settled between them after the truth came out. Not resolution, not peace, but recognition. And recognition, Clara knew, was the first thread in any fragile beginning. It happened 2 nights later. Clara had spent the evening in the greenhouse, a glass room attached to the eastern wing of the estate, filled with orchids and ivy and citrus trees too pampered to ever know struggle. She had discovered it by accident and returned each night, drawn to the scent of soil and damp leaves, the quiet hum of crickets just beyond the glass. It was the only place that felt human. She had stayed longer than usual, lost in thought, arms curled around her knees as she sat on the old wooden bench. When she finally rose to leave, her foot caught on a small hose coiled near the citrus pots. She stumbled, caught herself, but not before the watering can in her hand tipped forward, splashing down the side of her leg. The water was hot, too hot. She gasped, pain shooting up her calf. Clara dropped the can, her breathing shallow, as she clutched the skin near her shin. It had only been a second, but the scald was angry and red. She limped back toward the house, teeth clenched, more embarrassed than hurt, until the pain deepened, throbbing like fire beneath the skin. When she reached the hallway near the kitchen, she nearly ran into Ethan. He looked up from his phone, eyes immediately narrowing as he took in her limp, her flushed face. "What happened?" he asked sharply. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "It's nothing, just a little." "Clara," he interrupted, already stepping closer. "Sit down." She hesitated. "Please," he added. The word startled her. She sat on the nearest bench. Ethan crouched in front of her, examining the burn. The skin on her calf was red, irritated, already swelling in one spot. Without a word, he stood, disappeared through a side door, and returned moments later with a first aid kit she hadn't known existed. He knelt again, opened the kit, uncapped a silver tube. "Hold still," he said gently. Clara watched him, not just his hands, strong, careful, but his face. The furrow between his brows, the way he tested the temperature of the cream against the back of his own hand before touching her, the quiet way his thumb brushed against her ankle for balance. It wasn't obligation, it wasn't guilt. It was care, real, unfiltered. The cream was cool on her skin, a sharp contrast to the lingering burn. She inhaled through her teeth. "Sorry," he murmured, "almost done." She didn't respond. Her throat was tight. When he finished, he wrapped a soft gauze around her calf, securing it with practiced ease. Clara found her voice. "You've done this before." Ethan looked up, surprised. "What?" "Taking care of someone. You're good at it." A faint shadow crossed his face. "I used to be." His hands paused. "I used to think if I was careful enough, no one around me would get hurt." She didn't push, but she didn't look away either. Ethan stood slowly, offered his hand. Not commanding, not cold, just a gesture. She took it. He helped her up, steadying her when she winced at the pressure on her foot. "I'll walk you back," he said. "I can manage." He shook his head. "I know you can, but I want to." They walked slowly through the hall, his hand resting lightly on her elbow, their steps echoing together. For the first time, the silence between them didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a bridge being built. When they reached her room, Clara turned to face him. "Thank you." Ethan met her gaze. "You shouldn't have been alone." "I like being alone," she said quietly. "It reminds me I still belong to myself." He looked down. "I know what it's like to forget that." She wanted to ask what he meant, but the moment was too fragile. He nodded once and turned to leave. His hand was on the doorknob when she said, "Ethan." He paused. "If you ever want to talk about her, I'll listen." His shoulders stiffened. He didn't turn around, but he answered, "I'm not ready." I didn't say now. Another pause, then softer. "Good night, Clara." She whispered it back. The door closed, and for the first time since she had arrived in that cold, echoing house, Clara felt the temperature shift not in degrees, but in gravity. Something inside Ethan was thawing, and something inside her, despite everything, was beginning to believe that this story might not end in ashes. But she wasn't naive. She knew better than to trust a single moment, especially when pain had trained her to expect its return. It began with a shadow. Clara had been in the greenhouse again, her sanctuary, this time trimming a few of the unruly vines from the orchids near the back wall. It had become a kind of therapy, a way to claim something in a house that was never meant to be hers. The air was thick with humidity, and her fingers smelled like earth and leaves. She was barefoot, wearing one of the linen dresses the staff had tailored weeks ago. It was the closest she'd felt to peace in months, until the lights flickered just once, but enough to pull her eyes toward the far corner of the glass walls. There was movement, not inside, outside. Someone was there. At first, she thought it might be one of the guards doing rounds, but the shape tall, fast moved too deliberately. It wasn't patrol. It was pursuit. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She rose slowly, stepping back into the shadows, pressing herself against the cool glass, listening. The sound of footsteps in gravel. Closer. She didn't scream, not yet. Instead, she moved carefully, barefoot on tile, toward the side exit. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle, slipping slightly from the sweat on her skin. Then she heard it, the sound of glass tapping, not breaking, testing. Clara pushed the door open and ran. The grass was wet beneath her feet, the night sharp with cold. She darted toward the house, heart pounding, breath ragged. The hallway door was still open, thank God. She stumbled inside, slammed it shut, and locked it, then turned right into a solid chest. Ethan. His hands gripped her shoulders instantly. Clara. What happened? There's someone out there, she gasped, in the garden, watching me. His face changed completely. The man who had once spoken in cold calculation now burned with something she'd never seen before. Fury, not at her, for her. Stay here, he said. She grabbed his sleeve. Wait, don't go alone. But he was already gone. Clara ran after him, barefoot across the marble, adrenaline pushing away the pain. Ethan barked orders to the guards the moment he reached the front door. Back perimeter, now. One person, male, dark jacket, possibly armed. 2 men ran ahead. Another joined from the west wing. Within seconds, the grounds were alive with motion. Lights, radios, voices cutting through the dark like blades. Clara stood at the threshold, clutching the doorway, heart hammering. She didn't know if it had been a break-in or a message. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, Ethan returned, alone, his shirt damp with sweat, eyes wild with adrenaline. Nothing, he said, breathless. No one. Clara didn't speak. He stepped closer. I believe you. I don't think you imagined it. Her voice came out shakier than she expected. It wasn't a hallucination. I saw him. I know. He led her back inside, straight to the sitting room. He poured her a glass of water, placed it gently in her hand, and sat across from her, elbows on his knees, head bowed. This house is protected, he said quietly. It's wired, guarded. The idea that someone got through means either they knew the layout or they wanted to scare me. Ethan looked up sharply, and something in his face shifted. Last week, he said slowly, I denied a bid from the Stonefield Group. They wanted to buy one of our security arms. I refused. There were threats subtle, implied. Clara's eyes widened. You think this is about business? It's all about business, he said, even revenge. Her hand was still trembling slightly. He reached out, took it, held it between his palms. I should have never let you stay out there alone. Clara shook her head. I wanted the space. You've given me more than I expected already. He exhaled, his voice softer. And less than you deserved. They sat in silence. Longer this time, not the silence of avoidance, the silence of proximity. Clara stared at their joined hands. He was holding her like she mattered, like she was his to protect, not possess. I thought I'd built a fortress, he said suddenly, made of money, control, reputation. But tonight, when I couldn't find you for those 20 minutes, his throat tightened. I thought I'd lose everything again. Clara's heart ached, and yet she still hesitated. Why does it take danger for you to feel something? He met her eyes. Because you're the first person in years I've been afraid to lose. He almost said it, but he didn't. Instead, he brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch tender, hesitant, as though afraid she'd vanish if he pressed too hard. I'll increase security, he murmured. I don't need more cameras, she whispered. I need to know if I'm safe with you. The room went still. His gaze dropped. And when he looked back up, the answer wasn't in words. It was in the way his hands didn't let go, in the way he stayed there, kneeling before her, a man who had finally realized his past might explain him, but it didn't excuse him. And Clara, fragile, furious, brave. Clara was no longer just his redemption. She was becoming his truth. The house had never been this quiet, not the cold silence of before, but a quiet charged with something else, something that pulsed beneath the walls and between every breath Clara took. Since the night in the sitting room, Ethan had kept close, not in words, not in proximity, in presence. He moved through the mansion differently now, less like a ghost, more like a man waking up from a long sleep. His voice, when it came, had lost its edge. His footsteps slowed near her door. At breakfast, he no longer sat far away. He listened when she spoke, even if he had no answer. But most of all, he looked at her, and not with possession, with hesitation, as if each glance asked for permission. Clara felt it too. A quiet softening, not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. It was the night after the garden incident that something shifted irreversibly. A storm had rolled in from the west, casting long shadows across the windows. The rain beat down in heavy sheets, making the mansion feel smaller, more intimate. Clara couldn't sleep. She stood by her bedroom window, wrapped in a cardigan, watching lightning sketch broken veins across the sky. She wasn't afraid of storms. She was afraid of calm, because that's when her mind wandered. There was a knock at her door, not forceful, not tentative, just present. She opened it. Ethan stood there, hair damp from a walk through the halls, barefoot, holding a glass of water like it gave him a reason to be there. "I can't sleep," he said, voice low. Clara stepped aside. He entered quietly. She didn't ask why he came, and he didn't explain. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Her on the edge of the bed, him in the armchair, the storm drawing a rhythm around them. She sipped her own water, hands curled around the warmth of the ceramic. "I keep seeing you," he said suddenly, "in that greenhouse, alone, afraid, and I wonder if I ever made you feel anything else." Clara looked down. He continued, voice raw. "I never meant for this to become what it became, but it did." He stood, walked slowly to where she sat, and crouched before her. "I told myself I brought you here because of a contract, because of debt, but that wasn't the truth." Clara's breath caught. "I brought you here," he said, "because part of me believed I could punish the world by turning love into a cage, because I thought if I held something innocent long enough, maybe I'd forget how much I lost." She didn't speak, didn't move. His voice dropped to a whisper. "But you're not a placeholder, Clara. You're the only real thing left in this house." She looked at him, and for the first time saw all of it. His grief, his guilt, his fear of softness, and the aching need behind his anger. Slowly, she reached up, touched his cheek. He leaned into it without thinking, without pride. She stood, still facing him, and took the glass from his hand, setting it on the nightstand. Their hands brushed. He didn't pull away. The air shifted, their eyes locked. Neither moved first, but something inside both of them did. When he kissed her, it wasn't rough, it wasn't rushed, it was careful, full of everything he hadn't said. Clara melted into it, not because she had forgotten what he'd done, but because she finally saw what he was trying to become. His arms circled her waist, her fingers curled into his shirt. The kiss deepened, slow, deliberate, filled with a hunger that had nothing to do with lust. It was need and fear and relief. When they pulled apart, they didn't speak. There were no apologies in that moment, only truth. He rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know what this means," Clara whispered. "It doesn't have to mean anything yet." They stayed like that, breathing, leaning, listening to the storm rage outside, while something much quieter unraveled between them. Finally, he stepped back, eyes searching hers. "I'll go," he said. I needed to know if it was possible." Clara nodded. "It island." And that was enough. He walked to the door, paused, and turned. "Good night, Clara." Her voice followed him like a thread. "Good night, Ethan." When the door closed, she didn't cry. She just stood there for a long time, fingers still tingling, lips still burning, wondering how a man who once broke her spirit with silence could now heal parts of her with one single touch. She didn't know where this was going, but she knew where it had started. And that was something she never thought she'd want. A beginning. Clara noticed the signs before she allowed herself to name them. It began with small things. Fatigue that clung to her like fog in the mornings. Waves of nausea that came not from anxiety but from something deeper, older, cellular. The smell of coffee, once comforting, now made her stomach churn. She chalked it up to stress, to the long nights, to the emotional tension that still hovered between her and Ethan like a question neither of them dared ask out loud. But denial, she knew, was just a delay, not an answer. She stood in the bathroom one afternoon, the test in her hand, her pulse loud in her ears. The windows were fogged, the air still with the scent of rose soap. Time felt suspended, like the house itself was holding its breath. 2 lines. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, the world narrowing into a pinpoint of sound. Pregnant, a single word that redefined everything. She didn't cry, not yet. She just stared at the white plastic, at the pale lines, at the ceiling. Her mind flooded with images. Ethan's hands bandaging her leg, the kiss they shared in the storm, his confession in the greenhouse, his grief, his guilt, his heart trying to thaw. What would this mean for him, for them? The thought of becoming a mother didn't scare her. What scared her was bringing a life into a house that had only just started to feel like more than a cage. It took her 3 days to tell him 3 days of silence and hidden glances, rehearsing words she couldn't seem to say aloud. On the 4th evening, she found him in the study, leaning over a set of blueprints, sleeves rolled, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. It was a version of him she rarely saw, relaxed, human. She knocked softly. He looked up. Something in his face shifted when he saw her. Not tension, something gentler. "Clara," he said. "You okay?" She stepped in, closed the door behind her. "I need to tell you something." He straightened, immediately alert. "What is it?" Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't hide them. "I'm pregnant." The silence was absolute. He didn't move, didn't blink. His eyes locked on hers, and for a heartbeat, she thought he hadn't heard her. Then he breathed out, slow and low, like something inside him had just shattered and reassembled at the same time. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Yes." Another pause, then, "How far along?" "Almost 6 weeks." Ethan sat down hard, like the air had left his lungs. Clara watched him, bracing for anger, for retreat, for the shutting down she'd seen so many times before. But none of it came. He looked up at her, and what she saw in his face wasn't fear. It was awe. "You're carrying our child." She nodded again, her throat thick. "I don't expect anything from you. I don't want this to be another weight around your neck. I just needed you to know." Ethan stood slowly, walked toward her. "Clara," he said softly, "this isn't a burden." She didn't move. "You were never a burden, and this is not a mistake." Her voice broke. "I don't know how to do this with you." He reached out, took her hand. "We'll learn together." And just like that, she crumbled into him, not out of weakness, out of relief. His arms circled her, strong and warm, and for the first time, she felt what safety could mean when it was chosen, not enforced. He kissed the top of her head. "I won't leave," he whispered. "Not this time. Not again." That night, he sat beside her on the couch, his hand resting lightly over her belly, even though there was no bump yet, no movement, just promise. "Do you want to keep it?" he asked gently. She turned to him. "I already have." He nodded, and something flickered in his eyes. Hope, tentative and real. They talked late into the night about names, fears, the house, the future. For the first time, Ethan spoke about his father, about the pressure, about how he was never taught to love softly, only to lead, only to dominate, and how it had cost him every soft thing he'd ever been given until now, until Clara. The next morning, the staff noticed the difference. The way Ethan stood slightly closer to her, the way her fingers brushed his when he passed her a cup of tea, the way her smile came easier now. They didn't ask questions, but they whispered. Later that week, Ethan took her to a part of the house she hadn't seen before. A sunroom on the upper level, long closed off. The windows faced the east, where the sun rose like a promise. "This," he said, "could be the nursery." Clara turned slowly in the space, her heart swelling. "It's perfect." He watched her as she stood in the golden light, hand resting unconsciously on her belly, and for the first time, he saw not the ghost of what he had lost, but the shape of what he was becoming, a father, a partner, a man who could choose tenderness without shame. But the past, as Clara knew too well, never let go so easily. And just when they thought they were building something unbreakable, life would test the walls they had barely finished mending. 3 years had passed. The mansion no longer echoed with silence. It breathed differently now. The sharp edges of grief had softened into corners rounded by laughter, footsteps, stories, and the scent of cinnamon drifting from a kitchen that was no longer just for display. The garden was alive again, wild and intentional. Sunflowers reached for the morning light. Roses bloomed beneath the windows Clara had once stared through in quiet rebellion. There was a swing now, hanging from a sturdy oak in the center of the estate's eastern lawn, and on that swing sat a little boy named Oliver. His curls were dark and wild, like his father's had been when he was younger, and his eyes, soft gray with a hint of green, belonged unmistakably to Clara. Ethan sat cross-legged in the grass, letting Oliver run small wooden cars over his knees. He chuckled when one hit his shin and dramatically fell over. Clara watched them from the porch, a book open on her lap, unread, not because the story wasn't interesting, but because the real story was happening before her eyes. This wasn't the life she had expected. This was better, because it was theirs. It hadn't come easy. The birth had been long, painful, complicated. Oliver arrived in silence, blue and still, before letting out a cry so loud it brought every nurse in the room to tears. Ethan had been there the whole time, holding Clara's hand, whispering that she was strong, that she wasn't alone, that they had already survived so much. After that day, he was different, not perfect, but honest. He no longer hid in the study. He didn't avoid the past. In fact, on the anniversary of Sophia's death, he asked Clara to come with him to the cemetery. They stood together beneath a tree, Oliver asleep in her arms, and Ethan spoke for the first time in years, not to Sophia, to himself. "I forgive you," he whispered, "and I forgive me." Clara reached for his hand. He took it. That moment had sealed something between them that no paper, no contract, no arranged vow could ever have created. Real love, built from ash and choice. Inside the mansion, the walls had changed too. Oliver's drawings now hung beside the grand oil portraits. The sterile halls, once filled with marble emptiness, now echoed with music, baby giggles, the sound of toys clattering on hardwood floors. Clara had claimed more than just a place. She had reclaimed her voice. She wrote again short stories at first, then essays, then finally a novel, a story about a woman who had been promised to a stranger and found herself in the last place she expected, loved. Ethan read every draft quietly, and when he finally handed her the printed manuscript, annotated in the margins with pencil notes and tear stains, he kissed her cheek and said, "This is the bravest thing I've ever read." She kissed him back. "It's our story." He smiled. "Not anymore. It's yours." Oliver ran to her then, arms outstretched. She scooped him up, spun him once, and held him against her chest. Ethan joined them a moment later, slipping his arm around her waist, planting a kiss on her temple. "What are we doing today?" he asked Oliver. The boy considered it. "We build a castle." Ethan laughed. "A castle-lit island." They walked together through the grass, sunlight catching in their hair, hearts beating in rhythm with a life no one could have predicted. Clara paused once, looking back at the house that had once been her prison. Now it was her home. It was the place where she had been broken, and the place where she had been rebuilt. Stronger, freer, loved. Ethan leaned closer. "What are you thinking about?" She smiled. "How far we've come." He nodded, eyes soft. "And how much more we still get to build." She looked up at him. "You're not afraid anymore." He shook his head. "Not of love. Not with you." They walked on, the castle in Oliver's imagination already under construction, and in that quiet, golden morning, they understood something unspoken. Love doesn't always come like a sunrise. Sometimes it arrives like a storm, and when the sky clears, you find yourself standing in the light with someone who never left. They started as strangers, he saw her as a punishment, she as a prison, but in the end, they became home to each other. Because true love, the kind that transforms, doesn't always come with flowers and promises. Sometimes it comes with pain, with silence, with hard truths, and still, it's worth it.